We have just now finished this project, Impres. That is about how procurement requirements for carbon reductions can be implemented in infrastructure projects, and looking at how organizational and national policies apply to that. Some of our main findings is that we see that there's an ongoing process in developing policies and procurement requirements in all the cases and countries that we've studied. And the ambition levels are raised over time. And we see that there's now much frameworks and also executive mandate in place that would make it hard to avoid commitment for carbon reductions in many projects. But previously, in many cases, we see that this has been developed by dedicated individuals that have high set goals for changing the business. We've also seen that there are many ways of procuring low carbon solutions and many examples of how different ways of models for procurement requirements, different tools for calculations and so on. But we're still quite early on, and there's a lot of people struggling with how to do this. There are a lot of calculations for baselining and recalculations that might lead to that the focus on actual measures for carbon reductions might be lost actually. So there's need of support in this and to spread knowledge and guidelines and guidance for how to do this. Many of the measures done for carbon reductions we see are also mostly connected to reductions in cost, maybe not driven specifically by by the carbon agenda, so to say, but for reducing cost. But this is also evidence of it is possible to reduce carbon and at the same time reduce cost. One other finding is that we see that there are quite high expectations for innovations in large infrastructure projects through overall functional reduction requirements, but those expectations might be too high, and we see that these types of requirements are quite hard to implement because of large risks in these large projects that lead to a lack of possibilities for implementing new measures for carbon reductions. So therefore we see that there's a need of another more systematic way of driving innovation through innovation projects in smaller projects where you learn and create experiences and then start to implement them and test them in larger projects, and to drive this development over time is very important. You can't just rely on procurement requirements for doing this. A lot of the interviewees emphasize the importance of breaking the silo thinking in the industry. And to create integrated supply chains to solve these issues and to create new low carbon methods to implement in infrastructure projects. There's a need for dedicated leadership to change the way we work and to change the mindset for this. We have actually seen some quite good examples in this in the interviews that we've done of new ways of thinking to start working together in the supply chain to actually reduce carbon substantially and also reduce the use of resources and maybe also build less to come to this result. Procurement requirements are very important as a long-term framework, so the industry knows what the client side wants, ambitions and raised ambitions over time and so on. And they're also good for making the industry implement measures that they quite well know how to do. But it seems that procurement requirements might be less useful for driving innovation and getting things from the industry that they really don't know how to do, to find new ways of doing things. That causes quite a lot of risks in projects, and so it loses effect. It creates transactional costs for investigating how to do this and so, and well, it's quite risky, so to say. And therefore, for driving innovation, there's a need of another way of working more systematically with that. When you design the procurement requirements, you actually have to have quite good knowledge of what you want in the end and what mechanisms are desired to reach the targets. Our key recommendations to decision makers on the client side is to set high level goals and policies to enable for forerunners and engaged individuals to use them for changing the industry and setting new standards. Another key recommendation is that you think once more about how to design your procurement requirements so you get the desired effects, and think of how the procurement requirements affects all the actors in the supply chain so you get the desired effects. We also recommend to develop guidelines, tool and industry collaboration to develop the capabilities in the industry on a common basis. One other key recommendation is to enable a systematic innovation process that combines innovations in smaller projects with testing and development in larger projects on a more systematic level and on the industry level to create common knowledge and to spread experiences from these projects to spread development and new ways of working in the industry.